The story of Atlantis is one of the greatest mysteries ever told. It is the tale of a powerful civilization destroyed by the gods more than 11,000 years ago. For centuries, explorers have traveled the world in search of this lost city, but have found little. Did Atlantis really exist, or is it the work of one man's vivid imagination? The search for Atlantis has been the inspiration behind some of mankind's greatest achievements. It is the story of a great and powerful empire that became depraved and was sunk to the bottom of the sea by Zeus, the god of gods. Man has scoured the earth in search of Atlantis, yet we still have no exact location for this lost continent. But there are 3 islands that shed light on this mystery. The Greek island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea is a popular vacation spot, unparalleled in its beauty, but with a violent past. Crete, an island in the Mediterranean Sea whose history has contributed to the shaping of our world today. And Tenerife in the Atlantic Ocean, which many believe is the last remnant of the lost city. What is known about Atlantis begins nearly 2,500 years ago, when the Greek philosopher Plato first wrote the story down.
Atlantis had a great and wonderful empire which had rule over many others. This vast power gathered its forces to subdue at a blow its neighbors. Zeus, the god of gods, perceiving that an honorable race was in a woeful plight, inflicted a punishment upon them. Violent earthquakes and floods occurred. In a single day, Atlantis disappeared in the depths of the sea.
These words have baffled archaeologists, scientists, and historians for centuries. Is Plato referring to a real place? Or is it just a good story?
The story of Atlantis is one that's fascinated millions of people for hundreds of years. It's a story of an ideal society that was immensely wealthy, so wealthy that they eventually got greedy and started attacking people, and the gods got very upset about this and decided to send an earthquake and a flood, and the whole of Atlantis sank into the sea.
For generations, explorers have dreamt of finding this lost city. Alex Lesk is a classics scholar who studied Plato at the American School in Athens for 8 years.
The story of Atlantis comes from Plato, who lived in Athens 2,500 years ago. We don't know very much about Plato himself because he didn't include himself in his writings. We do know, however, that he came from a wealthy and aristocratic family, but he turned his back on the civic administrative life that he was destined for, and he decided to take a totally different track. He was extremely wise, highly respected, and had influence on the ancient people. He's basically the foundation of Western philosophy and the way we live our lives today.
Plato was an incredible man. I mean, he realised that the Earth was round, he realised the planets revolved around the sun, and if he tells us an island, the name Atlantis, existed, I think that we can take him as a credible source. What's more important is, where did he get this knowledge from?
Plato was not the originator of the Atlantis legend. The story had been known about for 9,000 years before he was born. It had been passed down through many generations and cultures. Deciphering fact from fiction has captivated scientists, historians, and archaeologists ever since.
Plato got his story from Solon, who lived 150 years before he did. And Solon got his story from an Egyptian priest who got his story from a stone written in hieroglyphics. Now, that is kind of a dodgy situation, one might say. Kind of like finding a videotape of Star Wars 1,000 years from now, popping it in the video player, and then wondering if it's a true story.
There's a well-established mechanism of rumour by which tales get elaborated so that various other elements of typical myths probably crept in on top of this one and converged into the whole Atlantis story. But I have no doubt that most myths are founded on major cataclysmic events like Noah's flood and the Atlantis story. Probably there is an element of truth in them that has been built upon by many other contributors over the years.
But what is it about this strange tale that has enthralled the public for so long?
Atlantis conjures up a certain image, not just obviously of underwater ruins, but also of paradise. There's no question that Plato would have incorporated these ideas into his works. Very much a sort of X-Files of its day.
To this day, there is no clear evidence of where Atlantis is located. Could it be hidden in the dense jungles of South America? Was it really a vast island in the Atlantic Ocean? Some even believe that the legend tells of ancient alien activity. In his writings, Plato insists the story is true, but to this day, it remains a mystery.
I will tell an old story which I heard from an aged man. Poseidon, the god of the sea, controlled the island of Atlantis. Larger than Libya and Asia put together. 9,000 years had elapsed since the war had taken place between those who dwelt outside the Pillars of Hercules
the center
and those
of the
who
island.
dwelt. There was a plain that extended by 3,000 stadia in one mountains direction. That descended towards the sea, surrounded it.
The story of Atlantis has spawned hundreds of movies and books. Hollywood adopted the legend in its own unique way, and the tale of Atlantis took on some bizarre new twists, few of which resemble Plato's story.
Atlantis is the perfect adventure story. You've got the moral tale of good and evil, a perfect civilization that has been lost, perhaps punished for falling into sin and decadence. You've got great cataclysmic events, volcanic eruptions, tidal waves, beautiful cities falling under the sea.
At the heart of the mystery is Plato's reference to the Pillars of Hercules. Atlantis, he wrote, is located outside the Pillars. These Pillars of Hercules are believed to be the Straits of Gibraltar, the point where the Mediterranean Sea meets the Atlantic Ocean.
The Pillars of Hercules were said to mark the exit of the known world, what we know as the ancient world. They were said to be legendary rocks, and all of the classical writers placed them at one location. And this is the entrance, or indeed exit, of the Mediterranean.
If we interpret the Pillars as the Gibraltar Straits, then Atlantis must lie in the Atlantic Ocean or beyond. But where?
Plato's description of Atlantis includes huge mountain ranges, which couldn't possibly have just disappeared overnight. There must be some trace of them still in situ, in place today.
One clue lies in the Canary Islands, off the coast of North Africa. Some believe these islands to be the remains of Atlantis, all that's left after it was sunk to the bottom of the sea by the gods. Tenerife is the largest of the Canary Islands. It lies in the Atlantic Ocean, 700 miles southwest of Spain and 180 miles west of Morocco. The sunny climate has established it as a popular vacation spot, attracting over 4 million tourists every year. The barren landscape looks more South American than European. Lying in the shadow of Mount Teide, Spain's largest mountain, is the village of Quimar. It's here that an extraordinary discovery was made. Ancient pyramids were found, over 20 feet high and 100 feet long, constructed with great precision and skill. But who built them and why is a mystery. Could they have been built by the people of Atlantis? The pyramids of Quimar attract over 100,000 visitors each year, inviting them to draw their own conclusions. Bridget Haypen is the director of the pyramids and is familiar with the many theories behind their construction.
There's definitely a popular belief here in Tenerife that Atlantis was via the Weimar, where we are now, and that the pyramids might have been part of the Atlantis. I mean, there's a lot of people that, you know, come and investigate and do their own investigations about this because it's a legend which a lot of people believe in.
If the pyramids were built by the people of Atlantis, the Atlanteans, what other evidence is there to place Tenerife at the heart of Plato's story?
Plato gives us geographical evidence saying that beyond the Pillars of Hercules, going into the Atlantic Oceans, there was a huge area which would have been Atlantis. And once it was sunk, I mean, the only remains, there were some peaks, which would be now the Canary Islands, or what would be the Canary Islands.
Thor Heyerdahl is a Norwegian anthropologist and explorer who lives on Tenerife. In 1947, Heyerdahl built a raft from balsa wood, known as the Kon-Tiki, and sailed the Pacific Ocean. He proved that ancient navigation was sufficiently advanced to cross vast stretches of water. Heyerdahl believes ancient seafarers ventured from the Mediterranean into the Atlantic and may have had contact with the Canary Islands many years before Plato's time.
At least for 5,000 years, man has been sailing between the islands in the Mediterranean, out of Gibraltar, now down the coast of Africa, along the coast of southern Spain. And it would be a miracle if nobody landed in the Canary Islands. And there are many reasons to suspect that the Aboriginal population of Tenerife had links with the great civilizations both in North Africa and in Mexico.
Could explorers have ventured outside the Pillars of Hercules and discovered an advanced culture on what is now known as the Canary Islands? And if so, did they return home with tales that became the foundations for this ancient mystery? Is it really possible that the islands today are the remains of Atlantis, sunk by the gods to the bottom of the sea?
Well, I know that many popular theories like to have it that the Canary Islands are the upper peaks of former mountains on land that sank in at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. But I don't believe that. As a matter of fact, I think that as a scientist, I ought to believe the geologists and oceanographers who can tell us that the coastline of these islands have been more or less what it is today throughout human history.
Although there appears to have been an advanced civilization here, it seems unlikely to have been the source for the story of Atlantis. The pyramids of Quimar remain a mystery.
The location of Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules is, I think, a total impossibility. The Egyptian priest who told the story may not even have known what the Pillars of Hercules were.
But there are many other theories. One man who believes he knows where the lost city lies is Atlantis hunter Don Pastris.
I've made the greatest historical discovery in history. I want to give it to the world. The lost city of Atlantis is just a few kilometres in that direction, underwater. And nobody seems to want it.
The search for Atlantis begins in the capital city of Greece. This is Athens. 4 million people travel to this city every year. It's a modern metropolis built on ancient foundations. 2,500 years ago, Athens was one of the most powerful cities in the world and home to an advanced civilization. It's here that the philosopher Plato took the tale of Atlantis and wrote it down. That story has been a source of controversy and exploration ever since. Don Pastris is a modern-day Atlantis hunter. He's used Plato's text alongside the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. Pastris is now convinced that he knows where the lost city of Atlantis lies.
I've studied Plato's text. I've ascertained that the site of Atlantis is just off the coast of Santorini. Tomorrow we'll be going there and just to breathe the air and be close to where the city is.
Pastris is a Greek businessman based in Melbourne, Australia. For the last 12 years, he's been seeking permission from the Greek authorities to dive on and photograph what he believes to be Atlantis.
I haven't been to Santorini before, but I know every inch of that landscape there, and I know it all through books. And I'm feeling quite nervous about being there, but I'm also looking forward to it. Can't wait.
Today, Atlantis hunters enjoy more modern methods of travel. Don Pastris follows in a long line of adventurers who have searched the 4 corners of the globe following Plato's clues. Expeditions have ventured into the deepest jungles and to the highest mountain peaks in search of evidence of this ancient civilization. Now, as technology advances, mankind can delve into frontiers once thought beyond reach.
Unfortunately, the interpretation of Plato's works have led people on wild goose chases all over the world in search of Atlantis. It's been located as far north as the Arctic, as far south as Antarctica. It's been located in the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, in the Mediterranean.
Atlantis hunters are a determined breed, but their quest has not always been a virtuous one. The largest expedition to go in search of the lost kingdom was planned by SS officer Heinrich Himmler. Himmler believed that the people of Atlantis, the Atlanteans, not only existed, but were the perfect race. In his view, the Aryan was a direct descendant of the Atlantean, and expeditions of Nazi anthropologists were sent throughout the world in search of the perfect race. Andrew Collins is an Atlantis expert. He's studied its history for 25 years and knows of its darker side.
Nazis believed their concept of a master race, of a superhuman capability, came originally from Atlantis, and that it was therefore essential for them to discover the whereabouts of Atlantis and bring it in line with the rise of their own empire.
Himmler believed that if Atlantis was found, with it would be discovered supernatural powers that could be harnessed and used against the rest of the world.
It was believed that Atlantis was part of some kind of advanced civilization, and that there may be a technology to be gained from discovering Atlantis today. Now, As to where they placed it, they didn't really know. They sent expeditions to the Arctic to look for Atlantis. They sent other expeditions to Central America, to Venezuela, to look for evidence of the master race there.
I'm not sure why Atlantis would appeal so much to the Nazis, other than the fact that they were seeking ideals as they saw them, and they might have been trying to locate a source for the ideal Aryan person that was part of this perfect world that they were seeking. They were also great explorers generally. Geographically and scientifically, it was a very active time, and it's a pity it went so badly astray.
Don Pastris is a 48-year-old modern-day Atlantis hunter. He's traveled just over 100 miles from Athens to the tiny island of Santorini, one of the Cycladic islands in the Aegean Sea. It is here that he believes lie the remains of Atlantis. In his search, Pastris has used a different interpretation for Plato's Pillars of Hercules.
Some people seem to think that Gibraltar is where the Pillars of Hercules were. But if you read the story of Plato, it talks about the Pillars of Hercules, and that the area was like a cup. So if we have the Pillars of Hercules in this area here, you can see that the Sarconic Gulf is similar to a cup with that area here. The story said that opposite the Pillars of Hercules was an island. Now here, if this is where the Pillars of Hercules was, we have an island opposite the Pillars of Hercules. Why would you look for an island opposite Gibraltar? I worked out through Plato's story that these islands were Atlantis. There's an island, and look at it. It's an enormous island.
Pastris has searched for evidence of Atlantis using writings from the country where the story originated, Egypt. He's interpreted the Book of the Dead, a spiritual guide to the afterlife written 3,500 years ago. He believes it to be another version of the legend.
Plato's Atlantis talks about a plain that was completely surrounded by canals. As you can see here, this plain is completely surrounded by canals. It's on a 2-to-3 ratio. In the story of Atlantis, the plain was 2,000 by 3,000 stades, which was a mistake. It should have been 200 by 300, but then again we come to the 2-to-3 ratio. Completely surrounded by canals, like the plain of Atlantis. All I want to do is photograph an underwater photographic expedition just to show them where the lost city of Atlantis is. I know that if we go out 10 kilometres in that direction, we'll find the city. We'll also find the temples, the hundreds of statues that were reputed to have existed at the time, possibly golden, possibly hundreds. And it's only in 130 metres of water. And all it takes is a little bit of initiative.
Pastris is passionate about his search for Atlantis. He's invested both time and money, but he's frustrated. His theory hasn't impressed the Greek Ministry of Culture, and his applications to dive on the site have all been rejected. His conviction in Plato's writing is not shared by the academic world.
Western universities are based on Plato's founding of the academy. And it's just pretty frustrating to think that there are some academics who think that he wrote mythology. He was a philosopher. A philosopher is a seeker of wisdom and truth. So how can they come to conclusions like that? There's always people that are cynical and people who think that you've lost your marbles, but they must have thought that Schliemann had lost his marbles when he discovered Troy, or Christopher Columbus, or Galileo. I don't mind. I know I haven't, and when I show the world that that's where the site of Atlantis was, well then those people that thought I'd lost my marbles will eat humble pie.
Don Pastris remembers the people who died on Atlantis. It's impossible to say whether his theory is right or wrong. The remains of a great and powerful city may be found off the coast of Santorini. But until an expedition is mounted, what lies in the depths will remain a mystery. Local fishermen regularly discover bits of pottery in Santorini's waters, evidence of an ancient civilization. But a lost kingdom is yet to be found. By coming to Santorini, Don Pastris has taken the first step in his quest to prove he's found Atlantis. Now, all he can do is reflect.
I know I've discovered on paper where the lost city of Atlantis exists, but for some reason the world is not interested in the greatest historical discovery in history.
The search for Atlantis continues on the island of Santorini. Santorini lies in the Aegean Sea, just over 100 miles southeast of Athens. Between May and September, the island is visited by more than 150,000 tourists. Santorini, or Thera, as it's otherwise known, is one of the most beautiful of the 160 populated Greek islands. But Santorini's past has not always been tranquil. This island is a dormant volcano. Over 3,500 years ago, the volcano erupted with such force that it destroyed the island and triggered the demise of an entire civilization. Tom Pfeiffer is a German volcanologist who has researched the Santorini eruption for the last 3 years.
The eruption of Santorini was a massive event. It was one of the biggest natural catastrophes that ever occurred during prehistoric and historic times. It was one of the largest volcanic eruptions during the past 10,000 years. Definitely an event that leaves a trace in legends.
Santorini has been associated with Atlantis for many years, and it's here that the most striking similarities to Plato's text are to be found.
Poseidon, being a god, found no difficulty in bringing up 2 springs from beneath the earth, one of hot water and one of cold. Stone quarried from beneath the ground came in 3 colors. One was white, another black, and the third red.
There's geologic similarities. The cold and warm springs Plato describes that existed on the central island, which is typical for volcanic places. These are even found today. It's the colors of the rocks of Atlantis: white, black, and red. These are the colors seen today on Santorini. And Plato tells in details about the high-standing civilization that lived on this island. And there was very high-standing culture here. And all this was just wiped out by this catastrophic event. And that fits very well to Plato's description how Atlantis was destroyed. Atlantis just disappeared into the sea. And that's exactly what happened on Santorini.
There are striking similarities, but one major problem. The destruction of Atlantis is said to have occurred 11,000 years ago. Yet we know the eruption on Santorini happened 3,630 years ago. The timings are wrong. Or is it, as is commonly accepted, a simple mistake made by Solon, the man who passed the story on to Plato?
Perhaps Solon misidentified the characters that he was reading in hieroglyphs. Perhaps he mistook the number 100 for the number 1,000. Therefore, the Isle of Atlantis would not have been destroyed in around 9,000 BC, but 900 100 years before the time of writing.
If Solon did misinterpret the dates, then the destruction of Atlantis would fall within a similar time frame to the eruption of Santorini. Another clue that places Santorini at the heart of the Atlantis story lies on the southeastern tip of the island. It was here in 1967 that Spiridon Marinatos, a Greek archaeologist, made the discovery of a lifetime. He unearthed Akrotiri, an ancient town preserved under a thick layer of volcanic ash. It was to cause great excitement among archaeologists and Atlantis hunters the world over.
My father started excavating in Santorini in 1967, and he had a fair idea at that time already where he was going to dig. As soon as the excavation started and this city was unearthed, there was huge excitement because it was for the first time that one had an intact city and one knew how people lived and so on. At that point, a connection with Atlantis had not been made. But once the journalists started flocking in, then the Atlantis issue became a very dominant one. The similarities would have been quite obvious because Atlantis, like Santorini, was completely wiped out by a massive destruction.
As the dig at Akrotiri continued, discoveries were made that many believed to be further evidence that Plato's Atlantis was based on events at Santorini. The find gave archaeologists like Colin MacDonald a window into the past. Up until this point, there was no clear picture of what Greek island life was like 3,500 years ago.
Akrotiri was an enormously important discovery, particularly because of the state of preservation of these houses, which are two and in at least one case, three-storied buildings of very fine architecture, unparalleled in the whole Aegean. And it allows the archaeologist to look at a building, the life of which has been frozen in time at a single moment. We know that every house ceased to exist at the same moment, ceased to live.
The Santorini eruption was perhaps the most cataclysmic event in the Mediterranean over the last 10,000 years. There's no question that it would have influenced the minds of classical writers like Plato, and that there is some element within his story of Atlantis that does reflect that event.
If the legend of Atlantis is based on the island of Santorini and its people, then there must be more to find.
It's clear that what has been discovered is a small fragment. It's not even half. It may not even be 1/3. But what is quite clear is that what we have the center, or we have part of the center. We have an area which is close to the harbor, where we have a couple of squares, we have nice streets. So it's not the outskirts of the city, but the center of the city. It's the Trafalgar Square of the city.
Santorini's connection with Atlantis is an image the island is proud of and is cultivated for its main industry, tourism. Every year, people travel from all over the world to this small Greek island. But is it really possible that this was Atlantis?
On the face of it, there are many parallels between Akrotiri and Atlantis. Both are very, very developed, highly technological civilizations, quite advanced. Both have been destroyed by a massive and unpredictable event. But actually, the parallels are very superficial. First of all, Santorini is a high technology civilization, but it was nevertheless provincial. The real center of power was Crete and not Santorini. Secondly, Atlantis sank. It was submerged into the water. It was not covered by a massive volcano. And none of the other details really fit. So I think that the parallels are very superficial. People get around them by saying, well, what do you expect? A legend can never record anything accurately. But so it is.
What awaits us in the future, we're not quite sure. It'll be extremely interesting if excavations continue down towards the sea and perhaps unearth the harbour. And until now, no human victims of the volcano have been found, except one in the 19th century.
If an ancient harbor on Santorini is found, the mystery of Akrotiri's missing population may be solved. On the 24th of August, 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius in Italy violently erupted, killing thousands. In a single day, the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum disappeared beneath 70 feet of compacted pumice and ash. Herculaneum was a coastal resort near Pompeii. Evidence suggests that it had a thriving population, yet when it was uncovered in 1980, only 6 bodies were found. It was a mystery that was solved 2 years later, when a hull was unearthed near the harbor. Inside were found the remains of 300 of Herculaneum's missing population. In the ensuing panic, people fled to the harbor in the hope of escape. Could this have happened on Santorini? Over 3,500 years ago, the volcanic island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea had a thriving culture. Until its volcano erupted and buried the island under a thick layer of pumice and ash. What happened on Santorini is commonly believed to be the basis of the Atlantis legend. The island's violent past holds many similarities to Plato's story. Tom Pfeiffer is a German volcanologist who is specialized in the Santorini eruption.
Well, this is an excellent outcrop. What you see here is this sharp line which divides the old soil, which existed at a time before the eruption. And well, if you say Santorini is connected to Atlantis, or some people might call it Atlantis, so then this would be the soil of Atlantis, buried on the thick pumice layer. It just rained pumice. Absolutely nobody could have survived it.
Tons of molten rock exploded out of the volcano, pulverizing the surrounding area. Poisonous gases filled the air. In 2 days, what was left of Santorini was buried under a thick layer of pumice and ash.
I think one of the great appeals of the Santorini theory is that Santorini and the islands that make it up are these concentric circles that Plato describes for Atlantis. We have an island that sank under the sea, that was extremely wealthy, advanced in its civic life and its religious life. But Plato doesn't mention there being a volcano.
The eruption on Santorini was the most cataclysmic event. Is it possible that these God-fearing people misinterpreted what they saw? The thick plumes of smoke and dust from the eruption would have prevented them from seeing exactly what happened on the island.
The power of this eruption is beyond imagination. The total amount of energy released, if you express it in atomic bombs of Hiroshima size, you come into the order of 1 million or 2 million atomic bombs of Hiroshima size that would correspond to letting go of about 10 bombs per second for 2 days. The original ash column reached probably 36 kilometers, injecting so much fine particles into the stratosphere, which very likely caused global climate change, a temperature decrease lasting 1 or 2 years, causing failed crops and so on. It was comparable to what we expect the effects of a nuclear winter be like.
Plato describes the event in his dialogues.
Violent earthquakes and floods occurred, and in a single day and night the island of Atlantis disappeared in the depths of the sea, leaving an impassable barrier of mud.
One thing that would certainly have happened after the eruption of Santorini is that vast amounts of pumice, thrown kilometers into the air, would have come down and absolutely clogged the sea, so that once the eruption had actually taken place, the seas would have been impassable, at least within perhaps a 10 or 20 kilometer circumference of the island.
Santorini's volcano is still active and growing. The stub of the old crater today is an island called Nea Kameni, Greek for new burnt one. It lies a short boat ride away in the center of the volcano. The crater is now dormant, but it's monitored around the clock. Any sign of activity and the island can be evacuated in hours.
Volcanoes are the most powerful force on this planet. And even this one is still alive, as you can see, and you still can feel the heat coming out of the magma chamber. Volcanoes are unpredictable, so we don't know with certainty, but it's very likely. One day this volcano will erupt again with devastating force, as it has done in the past.
If the volcano erupts with the same force again, in thousands of years, it too may be the basis of a new legend.
We will never know how much Plato was inventing, how much of his work is fiction and how much is a fact. But what we can say is, even if he invented the whole thing, the story is more or less still true. There wasn't this highly civilized population with a ring-shaped island that disappeared in a major event.
The eruption of the volcano on the Greek island of Santorini was one of the most cataclysmic events in the past 10,000 years. Thick volcanic ash blocked out the sun. Poisonous gases filled the air. As the volcano collapsed, tsunamis devastated surrounding coastlines. One place that would have been affected by the eruption is Crete, the largest of the Greek islands. Crete lies just over 100 miles south of Santorini. It is the tip of southern Europe and was the focal point for one of the oldest and most important civilizations in Europe, the Minoans. Minoan culture was crucial in the shaping of the modern world. Crete is the meeting point of three continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia. As such, it lies on a major fault line known as the Aegean Arc, making it prone to earthquakes. It is also the legendary birthplace of Zeus, the god of gods and destroyer of Atlantis. Today, Crete has a population of 500,000, which quadruples in the summer when its climate and seafood attract the world's tourists. Just 5 miles outside Heraklion, Crete's capital city, is the ancient palace of Knossos, Crete's most popular tourist attraction. In its time, it was the biggest palace in Europe. Carvings in the stone have been interpreted as tridents, three-pronged spears, the symbol of Poseidon, god of the sea and of Atlantis. In fact, Knossos bears remarkable similarities to Plato's fabled city. Colin MacDonald is a British archaeologist who was the curator at Knossos for 9 years.
The existence of the myth of Atlantis itself and its connection with Greece and the Mediterranean is certainly worthy of very detailed investigation. There are perhaps three interesting parallels between Knossos and the idea of Atlantis. One, of course, is a king at its head, and it appears that there was a ruler, and whether this is a king or a priest-king, we don't know, but that's fine. Another aspect is the ability of the Minoans to be a large sea power, which was important in terms of the history of Atlantis. And there is a certain militaristic side to the Minoans. The third similarity is the fact that Knossos was affected by not one but many natural disasters, and one of these was a great earthquake immediately before the eruption of Santorini.
It seems that Knossos also suffered a devastating natural disaster at the same time as the Santorini eruption. It was struck by an earthquake. Could this be the earthquake Plato refers to? Colin MacDonald believes that after the tremors hit, the great palace was destroyed by fire.
If an earthquake is going to start a fire in a palace, this is the area where it would have caught most quickly. This is the West magazines with enormous storage jars and great storage pits which would have been filled with oil and grain. And these narrow corridors would have been lit by oil lamps, and even a modest earthquake could have knocked these lamps over, causing the fire to erupt and burn very, very fiercely with all the oil around.
Knossos was built largely out of wood. With the strong thermal winds that affect Crete, fires spread quickly. The palace was razed to the ground. Knossos, like Atlantis, never stood a chance.
Perhaps there the precise parallels end, and Knossos appears rather different. It is not near the sea, it is not fortified, it doesn't bear any similarity to the geography as described in Plato. So the similarities are perhaps too general.
Although Knossos has many similarities to Atlantis, it seems unlikely that the advanced civilization that thrived here 3,500 years ago could have been the source for Plato's story. The story of Atlantis is a tale of morality, and perhaps this is why it attracts so much interest. There is little doubt that the search for Atlantis will continue well into the 21st century.
It is amazing that so much interest is shown by common people in the legend of the Atlantis, by people who don't care so much about the human past. So I've often wondered, could it be because this story has something to do with the human future, because we are all interested in our own future. If something as dramatic as that can have happened in the past, maybe it will happen again in the future.
I think it would be a great pity if Atlantis ever was nailed down to a particular geographical spot, but I also think that's very unlikely, because there is no one Atlantis. There are various places that people have fitted up against the myth of Atlantis. And Santorini fits best, but of course you could argue for other places. The myth would exist regardless of any particular incident, because we have a need to manufacture stories of that kind.
Atlantis is one of the great remaining mysteries that so far has eluded science, technology, and exploration. As long as these mysteries exist, people will continue to travel to the ends of the earth to solve them. Despite Plato's insistence that Atlantis did exist, one question remains. Is his great work one of fact or fiction? We can be certain of one thing. If Atlantis is found, it will be the greatest archaeological discovery of all time.